And here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the very first live episode of Broncos Talk. Today, we are going to go over the Broncos offense of 2020, the good, the bad, and the just plain ugly. We're also going to be talking about the current GM search situation and how the Broncos fare. And we'll also try to get into NFL news, about the wild card and whatever we have enough time for. So join us today on Broncos Talk. I gotta say, Rich, the more I see that intro, the more I like it. It's really good.
Thanks. That was pretty slick.
Anyway, my name is Adan Diaz, and so joining me today for Rich is my co-host. I'm sorry, I'm kind of nervous, so I do apologize. Is the new co-host to the Broncos Talk podcast. Please welcome my friend RichiRichEh. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thanks, bud. How you doing?
I'm doing good. So I know we were kind of talking about this being in the backstage. The Broncos offense 2020, if you had to give the entire assumption a grade, what would it be?
Well, I definitely, in my general opinion, I like breaking down the different groups. So for me, the offensive line, I actually like to go slightly more granular than that, just because I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to that kind of stuff, if you will. So I think our tackle situation, as up in the air as it seemed to have been, I actually would grade that pretty high. I'd be going more like B+ kind of deal, particularly once they got rid of Wilkinson and put Dotson in, and then somehow Wilkinson, when he was hurt, learned how to play and then came back and actually played well. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for whatever was going wrong or what was off with him at the very beginning of the season. I really do think that credit needs to be given where credit's due. He came back and he played better, and good for him. I know this is likely going to be somewhat unpopular with certain people, but I might be generous and give the interior line a C. But I'm leaning more towards like C- D, because I was really, really unimpressed with how they generally played. I do think Cushenberry started playing better as the season progressed. I still just didn't like the fact that he was getting pushed back. And I think that when you're dealing with a younger quarterback like Drew Lock, who you're trying to coach to step up into the pocket and lean into throws, that having a center getting pushed back towards you is just not a good look.
Yeah, no, I agree with you totally. And I actually share that same sentiment in terms of grading the O-line. I do think that my expectation for the O-line, even without Juwan James, was, hopefully a B, B- at the worst, because I was hoping that obviously we were going to expect some struggles from Cushenberry. But I was hoping that, his left and his right guards would be able to help, formidify that line and, solidify it, even though they've already had to deal with the turnstile that is Elijah Wilkinson. But unfortunately, the only shining light of the O-line has been Garrett Bowles, a guy that a year or two ago we all wanted to, run him the heck out of Denver. And here he was like Superman coming in to save the day, and then just playing probably one of his best years he's ever played in the NFL. So I do commend them on that, but I share like I said, I share your sentiment on that. I do think the O-line struggled in terms of, trying to solidify. And, yes, there were injuries, there were rotations. DeMar Dotson, to me, is still a huge upgrade from what we had in Elijah Wilkinson, although it is still a bit of a head scratcher as to why Mike Munchak keeps putting Wilkinson in this game. And it's something that I can't understand. It's something that I don't think any Broncos fan or analyst can understand. But at the only time that O-line let the quarterback down was probably when Drew Lock got hurt in that Steelers game. And even then, you can't really blame it all on them, because it was just Drew Lock trying to extend the play. But
you can blame it on the O-line. There was multiple free rushers throughout that game that I mean, I will put it squarely on Wilkinson, where he didn't do it literally, but for all intents and purposes, he turned to his left and set the quarterbacks that way.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why it was very much a night and day sort of scenario, where he, like, Wilkinson was hurt for like what, 3-4 games, I think, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And then he came back, and the number one thing about an offensive lineman is if you start hearing their name, something's probably gone wrong, right? It's it's just one of those positions where you almost want to go the entire game, kind of like what we started doing with Garrett Bowles this year, where his name was never mentioned, and then you kind of came at the end of the game and said his name was never mentioned. That was amazing. Although back on kind of Bowles and how all these other talking heads, I've been posting on Broncos forums for ages, and I was one of the I only started getting into the pods and stuff in the last little bit. But for me, I've been on the Broncos forums for absolute eons, and my big thing with everyone is everyone was crucifying Garrett Bowles, and my pushback was, yeah, he's had some bad moments, but he's basically average.
Right. No, I totally get that.
And a penalty here and a penalty there, while some of them are crippling, especially some of those holding penalties that were occurring that started bumping us back and basically killed drives. It's not like there was 6 or 7 of them a game. It was like 1 or 2 or 3 a game. Now, some of them came at the worst possible moments, right? So I mean, they say timing is everything, and I think that's a great example. But with regards to Bowles, he really wasn't that bad. The only thing that we saw now is the NFL not calling as many holding penalties, coupled with Garrett Bowles actually improving and taking those next steps, literally led to, in my opinion, a perfect storm when we started seeing, well, Garrett Bowles is now an All-Pro, right? Second team All-Pro, and deservingly so, right?
Right. Albert Knoppers, thanks for watching the show, my friend. Welcome. Hope you enjoy it. To your comment about Cushenberry being put in too early. Now, that's something that I actually was thinking about during the offseason, but unfortunately, the Broncos were not able to secure Connor McGovern from leaving in free agency. So the Broncos were pretty much, unless they went out and got somebody off of, a vet out of free agency like they did DeMar Dotson. But other than that, I don't think that Denver really had much of an option. So the Cushenberry start is, it was going to be rough. But that's pretty much for any player coming into the NFL in terms of, they're not going to pick up, especially if they were superstars in college like Jerry Jeudy was and Cushenberry and other players too. They're rightfully respected. But Cushenberry, as you said, Rich, he has been learning. He has been getting stronger as the season progressed. So hopefully he can come back in his sophomore year and just be more formidable, tougher, not outsnap the ball or commit any of the mistakes that he made in his freshman year, because obviously he won't have the same amount of error in terms of if those mistakes don't get cleared up.
Right. Back on that comment, though, the other thing you have to remember is the Broncos did not have a healthy. And sorry, if Albert, I see your new comment there. They could have played Glasgow there. Which is where I was going to go with that comment. The problem is that they did not have a healthy Netane Muti at the beginning of the season. Mm-hmm. So we have to remember is that while I may be actually the biggest Netane Muti fan amongst anybody in all of these pods, I've as soon as I saw him play the first game and I looked at his college tape, I was saying, so is he back to like 80%? Because that's better than half of what I'm seeing from Glasgow right now. Yeah. Right. I'm sorry. It was not pretty. Mm-hmm. So the problem that we had at the very beginning of the season was that we didn't have a healthy Muti to put in at that right guard position, who was clearly the second best guard, or in my opinion, the first best guard, but in the Broncos' opinion, the second best guard to slot into the right. And then Glasgow is really the only other seasoned offensive lineman that would have probably looked better at offensive center. But the Broncos and the staff there made a decision. I personally don't necessarily agree with it, because I think that you can sometimes stunt someone's growth by forcing them to stick in the game and feel that they are inadequate at completing their position or competing at their position.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there is some value, and there would have been some value in us pulling Cushenberry, sitting him on the bench for a little bit, but make it more of a, you're not being benched, but we're basically trying to work with you on keeping your confidence up while still giving ourselves an opportunity to win.
25% of Moody is better than 100% Wilkinson. I wholeheartedly agree with you, Albert. And that's been the sentiment this entire season, in terms of, it's almost been like, musical chairs with this offensive line. Dalton Reisner is another name that we, as Broncos fans, I feel, were kind of a bit of a letdown, because Reisner had such a fantastic year last season, and he comes into this one, and I know he's had some injuries, so I can understand some of the struggles, but it's been consistent in terms of, I don't want to say inefficiency, because he wasn't like Wilkinson terrible, but at the same time, coming into his sophomore year, we did expect a lot better from him, and he's also made that abundantly clear. So I do hope that him coming back in his third year, he can come back and, just like Cushenberry, just like the other guys that are coming back that are not rookies, just kind of help themselves refortify. Juwan James coming back does kind of worry me a little bit, because he hasn't had the same amount of time playing with these guys like these guys had over the past season. We don't know if DeMar Dotson is going to be signed and brought back, so there's still that chance that Wilkinson is still going to be hanging around as a second starter, and then just come in whenever Juwan James gets hurt. So that does worry me a bit.
The other thing that I'd like to actually see, I don't know if it will actually happen, but I would like to see is, I actually thought Calvin Anderson, when he had to fill in for Bowles, played probably some of the best backup left tackle I may have ever seen in years. I do think that when he covered in at right tackle when he was needed there, he did not play particularly well at the right tackle position. So I would like to see him work on flipping his technique to perhaps be a swing tackle for us. And in theory, that would be a step up for him, because right now he's just basically a bench starter. So he basically sits on the bench and hopes someone gets injured. Not that anyone hopes someone gets injured, but that's basically the only way he's going to see the field. Whereas if he gets himself up to a better spot where he can flip his technique and play both right and left at the tackle position, that would certainly give him the opportunity of sticking probably with the Broncos for at least 3 to 4 years, if not longer, if he's willing to kind of take that team-friendly kind of extension deal to stick around. And then, maybe in a couple of years after that, he may be able to get himself a starting gig elsewhere. But I'd like to see him take some next steps forward and learn to play the right side better.
No, I totally agree. But, before all that, though, we have to give credit where credit's due. I think Mike Munchak has done a really fantastic job helping those guys, because as backups, we really didn't expect to come out and say things like that. We didn't expect Moody to come out and play so good. And the same thing with Anderson, especially seeing as, them getting thrown into the fire. So, and it's a promising sign for Denver, because then you don't so much have to panic or get freaked out if Glasgow or even Bowles goes down with an injury next season. That the next man up mentality is there, and that the next man up can handle can come in and handle the job. So big ups to Mike Munchak and the job he's done.
I think he's done okay. I am a bit concerned that I think I posted this somewhere. I'm not sure if it was Twitter or elsewhere. I'm a bit concerned that we've had to sink so much of our offensive line resources specifically into developing Garrett Bowles. And part of the reason I'm a bit concerned about that is we saw a decline in Reisner. Injuries or not, we saw a pretty substantial decline in Dalton Reisner this year. He's all but admitted it, right? Mm-hmm. He's literally came out publicly and said that was not good enough, which is a promising sign. And then at the same time, you also have to wonder with Glasgow, Cushenberry, and others, did that impact their ability to get the proper coaching when there was so much of that attention focused and deferred over to Cushenberry, or over to Garrett Bowles rather?
Mm-hmm. No, and to answer your question, Albert Knoppers, which is why not have a back for both the left and the right tackle and train them to be swing tackles for depth? That would be an intriguing option, but can you really expect something like that from a guy like Juwan James, who you're paying a lot of money for, and his risk of injury is, at this point, you can say it's high. So to kind of have him as a swing tackle, I wouldn't really jeopardize that. I'd rather just leave him stay put where he is, and hopefully he can play an entire season without injury, because I think that would be a Christmas gift for every Broncos fan in Broncos country.
There are some guys that are just simply, they are better suited for one side of the line.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop, period. That's it. I think that Juwan James is a right tackle. That's it. He is a right tackle. And I think that Bowles, with his athleticism, probably could learn to flip his technique and go right side as well. But why would you want to do that when he's already shown the athleticism and a clear ability to be a league top 5, top 3 tackle by the end of the season? And for most of the season, he was actually grading out as the top left tackle. I had a funny feeling he was going to come back a little bit down to earth as the season went on a little bit.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, grading out as a top 3 tackle in the league when you had half of a fan base calling for you to get cut, a handful of months ago, is pretty spectacular. But back to Juwan James, I really don't think his technique can properly flip. I don't think his body and measurables are suited to flip his technique to cover both left and right side. And then there's also the other problem that he got hurt last year and he could not overcome it. And there was actually rumors that were coming out of Dove Valley and the Broncos organization that they felt that he was healthy enough to come back and play, and he refused.
Mm-hmm.
So that needs to be factored into all of this, on whether or not you want to try and put extra resources into coaching some guy who may or may not have the drive and want to play football. And I actually think that's part of the reason why we saw the comments from Garrett Bowles earlier this season, or earlier, right when the offseason kind of started off,
Yeah.
and kind of came into play, where he kind of basically called out Juwan James and saying he's got to earn, his respect back in the locker room. And I believe that's why.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe his opt-out for COVID factored into it. I believe that what Bowles was referring to was what happened last season, not what happened this season.
No, and I totally agree. I think that Juwan James's game of catch-up is going to be really, really long, a lot longer than he expects. So I do hope he can get to that level, because I just don't want to have any type of animosity on that line, because that O-line, in order for them to be great, they need to be on one level. They need to work as one team, not one guy trying to outdo the other, or, wherever there's weakness on that line, they have to try to cover each other with it. So with that in mind, let's move on to the next part of the offense, which is the quarterback, Drew Lock. Me personally, I think that Drew Lock let down a lot of people in Denver going into the season. And I said it before during the offseason. I did say that I felt that a lot of people, analysts and fans alike, were overhyping Drew Lock. And I just thought that the hype was getting so big that not even as a Bronco fan could actually believe it. And it kind of worried me a little bit, because I'm like, now they're talking about that, Drew Lock is going to go out there and have a Patrick Mahomes type of year and throw for 55 touchdowns and, and just live in the glory. And then that plane just came crashing down, and it really bummed me out. So me personally, I still believe in Drew Lock. I think he could be the guy. But if you ask me to grade him, I'd probably have to say it's probably like a good C+.
I'm more like see, I was not one of those people that expected Drew to come out and absolutely go bananas and go crazy. Mm-hmm. That being said, I did expect him to come in I expected him to have come in having done more work on himself and his game in the offseason on his own. For those of you who don't know, my background is in rugby, so I have a contact sport background. My whole family's played, semi-pro or pro sports, so I'm like fourth generation crazy, I guess. But in terms of that, I just expected a drive. I expected a professionalism of sorts to go out and say, okay, I have these top, say, 4 or 5 things on the list of critiques, if you will. Footwork, throwing off back foot. I know they're somewhat tied together, but they are separate. Getting better at reading defenses and understanding coverages better. And then also not relying fully on the scramble, but relying on also stepping up into throws and stepping up and climbing the pocket, climbing it like the ladder to get throws out and leaning into those throws for extra power.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, what we saw was actually more of a regression rather than a progression. So when Drew started this year, Drew was really, really good at throwing a whole lot of interceptions.
Yeah.
He was also really, really good at playing what I hear as the catchphrase now is hero ball. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is he was tossing at so many of those interceptions that ended up happening early in the year. He actually wasn't making necessarily the worst decisions per se. He was making the right decisions but applying the wrong technique.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of either applying the wrong technique or very poor ball placement, he was putting the ball on the wrong side of his receivers or too high or too low for his receivers, which was then lending and leading for the opposing defenders to either jump the route and pick it off or have it literally thrown directly into the arms of the defenders that were covering the guy that he was covering. One of the great examples was Fumagalli.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that overthrow.
Right.
And I can see your point, Rich, and I can honestly say that I respect it. I'd like to. I wanted to think that after that week 1 game that was just Drew Lock trying to get the rust out, Drew Lock and Pat Shurmur trying to get on the same page. But as time progressed, the offense, instead of showing improvement, if it wasn't Phillip Lindsay or Melvin Gordon, trying to spark the offense, it was, Drew Lock turning the ball over, the Broncos offense going 3 and out in the first half or in the first drive. It just started off so negative, and it took all the way up until the game against Carolina, where Drew Lock just went crazy for 4 touchdowns, that, he started to show that he has that ability. Unfortunately, Broncos country is not a very patient fan base where they have to wait for their quarterback to show initiative, to show promise, to show that they can be the man. So
I wanted to quickly talk to Boggan's comment here in the comment section here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think it's a fair comment to say that Drew had to learn a new offense. So I don't think it was a fair expectation, which is why I did not personally come into this season expecting, the second coming of Patrick Mahomes and the league, losing their minds a second go round. What I did expect to have happen was missed throws due to route concepts not being fully understood between the quarterback and the receivers as a result of not having an off season. Those are the types of things that I expected to see, because those are the types of things that you build up over the course of the OTAs and the off season and that sort of thing. And you also build up over time of working with each other, right? Like as the time progresses, you expect those, nuances and the timing and all that kind of stuff to kind of work itself out. For me, though, what was really disappointing was the stuff that I was seeing wasn't necessarily route concepts that were being missed, and it wasn't necessarily all timing issues. The stuff that I was seeing was as a result of Drew's errors. And what was even more concerning, to me at least, was I was seeing some of them begin to repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Last season, when we had Scangarello, and I apologize, I can't remember the quarterback's coach last year, but we started to see Drew make mistakes. And if they happened a second time, it was a rarity. Like you looked at it and said, oh, I can't believe you did that again. That was strange. So that's part of the reason why I think a lot of Broncos fans came into this season having the expectation level that they did, because they started seeing Drew at the end of last year. First off, the team went 4-1. We can argue how and when they did that and all that good stuff, but we ended up 4-1. But we did see Drew typically not make the same errors twice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of the fans were kind of saying, okay, well, if he's one of those guys, we all know someone in our life that, you see him make a mistake once and then it never happens again. And they just, those people annoy me. But, but there's always one or two of those in your life. And we thought that he may have been one of those guys where he made a mistake once, he misread a coverage, and then that just never happens again. And unfortunately, Patrick Mahomes is that guy. Looks at a coverage, reads it once, and is like, it's up here for good, right? And I think that's why so many Broncos fans came into this season, having high expectations.
Yeah, well, and to play devil's advocate to your point, Rich, we also, one thing that a lot of people not just fail to realize, but they don't seem to incorporate in their opinion is the fact just how big injuries were in terms of hurting his development.
So I have to interject on that one. We had on the offensive side of the ball one starter who was a week 1 starter on IR, and that was Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. Now, I'm not saying that injuries were the reason why Drew Lock played terrible. I'm saying that the injuries were the reason that didn't help Drew Lock improve. So Jerry Jeudy coming into this offense was not slated to be the starter. He was slated to be kind of like the guy that Courtland Sutton, if he's being double coverage, that Jerry Jeudy can run his routes and catch the ball. Same thing with KJ Hamler. But when Courtland Sutton went down, that veteran presence that Sutton brings to the table was gone. And Tim Patrick, I give him credit for going out there and doing his best job in trying to fill that role. But even with Tim Patrick out there, Jerry Jeudy just couldn't get past that image that he most likely had in himself of being, the number one guy. And then when he finally got that chance to be it in a meaningless game against the Chargers, we saw that it was like his hands were made out of butter and he just had pass after pass after pass go through his hands.
Right. And before I get into Glenn's question here, if we can just keep that on the screen, I wanted to quickly touch on that and another question that hasn't been posted on the screen just yet, a quick rapid fire. Jerry Jeudy is a technical route runner, a highly, highly technical route runner. Drew Lock comes off as more of a backyard football type quarterback. He is not the same. He is a quarterback better aligns with guys like Noah Fant, Albert O, Tim Patrick, and Courtland Sutton. They are throw it in my area and my zip code, and I am going to catch the ball. Mm-hmm. Jerry Jeudy, when you look at how he runs his routes, first off, it blows your mind that a rookie can do some of those types of things, right?
Amazing.
I mean, unbelievable. But when you actually look at how Jerry Jeudy runs his routes, the first thing that comes to my mind is, could you imagine what Peyton Manning would do with that guy? Could you imagine? Could you imagine what Peyton Manning would do with Jerry Jeudy as even a primary or secondary receiver?
Mm-hmm.
And because that literally is exactly what Peyton is, right? And even right. Tom Brady and a guy like even like Drew Brees to a certain extent, right? They are the types of quarterbacks that literally say, okay, I am taking 3 steps and I'm waiting 1 second, and you need to be on that very spot on the field at that particular time. And no, I do not give a crap at how you get there. Right? I don't care how you get there, is that you just need to be right there. And I agree. That's like a Marvin Harrison. That's like, a guy like that. Even a Wes Welker, I think, is a good example of another guy who is very similar to that as well. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason why both Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, have you ever heard either of them say anything bad about Wes Welker? I haven't. Nope. So again, similar to those things there. And just pushing back on Albert's comment there in the chats on the play calling and then getting to Glenn. I don't think that this is a play calling issue as much as people think. there was so many layered routes that were open throughout the season, both intermediate, short, and deep. I actually think that this was more of an issue with Drew Lock's style than it was necessarily all play calling, because I just don't think Drew was at a place early enough in the season. I think he was trying to process too much. He could not go through the progressions of his routes fast enough to hit the receivers at the right time. And that's part of the reason why we started to see at the beginning of the season, actually, I didn't say we started to see, but we saw at the beginning of the season, all those picks and interceptions.
Right.
He was trying to go through the routes. And then when he finally decided, oh, I guess I'm going to throw there, the defender said, thank you, I'll take it. And that's also why I think near the end of the season, we stopped seeing the interceptions, because I think he actually started to get that route tree concept a lot better. But then he was holding on to the ball and not securing it well. And then he was getting tackled and it was ending up getting stripped. And I just think that was the difference between the beginning and the end of the season. And part of the reason why, yeah, the interceptions went away, but we still turned the ball over because of Drew anyways, because he got it taken away from the other defenders.
Yeah. And to answer Glenn's question, I guess it all depends on who the assigned GM brings in the offseason. If they bring in a guy like Fitzmagic, let's say, it would all depend on what type of what type of I don't know if the word is contract, but more like the stipulation. Because what Fitzpatrick did in Miami this year, to me, I feel like they did him wrong. He started out as the hot hand in Miami, and then going into their bye week, he was benched for Tua for no reason. It wasn't because Fitzpatrick was struggling or he was playing bad. It was just a coach's decision. And then they only brought in Fitzmagic whenever Miami was stuck in a jam, and 2 times he was able to get him out of it. And had Fitzmagic not come down with COVID, they may have had a different answer in terms of playing the Bills. But if he can come in and they can tell, Fitzmagic, hey, we're not going to do you like they did in Miami, where we're only going to bring you in whenever Drew Lock, stinks up the field, then I think that Drew Lock can benefit from somebody's veteranship, which is something he didn't get from Joe Flacco last year. And that was pretty upsetting, because even though a lot of people didn't like Joe Flacco, myself included, I always, put my support behind who the quarterback is, whether I don't have 100% confidence in him. But for Joe Flacco to go out there and not do what he did, and just not be the guy, and kind of be stuck up, if you will, it didn't rub me the right way. So Glenn, to answer your going back to answer your question, it honestly depends who the GM brings in free agency. Sorry, stuttering a little bit. I really don't want a guy like Matthew Stafford. I don't have anything against him, but his contract is really expensive. I don't think Denver could afford him, and his injury list is pretty long. And this stuff about Deshaun Watson, it's got to stop. Deshaun Watson is not coming to Denver. As much as we would like to, Denver would have to sell the farm just to even have an imagination shot of bringing somebody like him in. So if you can get somebody like him in,
not to mention he has to agree to it.
Yeah, and he has to agree to it. So
yeah,
you have to try to think more reasonable, like either Fitzmagic or an Andy Dalton, or I can't think of any other vets' names. I wouldn't go as far as say Sam Darnold. I don't think Sam Darnold you can consider him a vet. He's more than likely going to go to a team that needs a quarterback to start off right away, like maybe Washington. Or you can get Alex Smith if he doesn't re-sign with Washington. I would love to have Alex Smith on the Denver bench, just behind Drew Lock.
He's my pick. If possible, that is definitely my pick.
I would go with Alex Smith over Fitzmagic or Andy Dalton, hands down. But that just comes down to whoever Denver picks as the GM, and whoever the GM feels can be a veteran help for Drew Lock. And in case Drew Lock is not the answer for 2021 and the Broncos decide to move on from Lock, then we're going to roam the quarterback desert again. We won't know where we are in the draft pick. We won't know what free agency is. So it would be nice to have a vet that can kind of bridge that gap until Denver can get their ducks in a row and find the next quarterback.
I'd like to maybe move on to two positions that I think we can probably go through a little faster. I think wide receivers are a little bit trickier. I think you can agree with me there, just because we
Mhm.
have a few key people that are kind of coming up to where we need to make some decisions. What do you think about the tight ends?
I was actually really impressed about Albert O. I'll be honest with you. I actually saw some of his tape from college, and I don't really watch college ball. I'm not a college guy, so I actually liked what I saw, and the fact that we were robbed of a season of Albert O due to injury, it really broke my heart because here I was actually did my homework, getting excited of what could be a really fantastic relationship between Noah Fant and Albert O and Drew Lock, and it just kind of fizzled. And Noah Fant, I love the guy, but when him and Lindsay are on the same boat, they try to play when they're injured, and while I admire their spirit, it actually ends up hurting more because they're not playing at 100%. When they're at 100%, those two guys are incredible, but when they're wounded, it's a whole different story.
I actually disagree. I actually think Fant played pretty well when he was hurt. I actually think the Fant issue was Shermer probably trying to protect Fant from himself. But I actually think Fant played quite well when he was hurt. I was actually surprised at some of his cuts and the way he was breaking out of routes and stuff. It really caught me off guard. Especially when I just heard the week before that, he had an issue with his ankle and a whole bunch of other stuff, and I just said, well, I mean, I've really hurt my ankle like badly, and I'm not sure I could do that on a hurt ankle properly. Um, and so I think that was really impressive. No, I was also never pumped up with drugs before I went on the field either. But that's another story. But I was really impressed with how I saw. He was Albert 100%. He absolutely was drawing those defenders. And actually, Albert, I think it's also more important. He was not just drawing like the tier 3 and 4 defenders. He was drawing more often than not the CB2 or the cornerback 2, and sometimes if they had a bigger safety, he was drawing the bigger safety to try and slow him down and stop him. So that was something to make note of, is that other teams, they know what they're dealing with, and they're starting to fully understand the kind of effect on their defense that Fant can have. Albert O, though, I'm very curious. They didn't really use him much in the blocking game, and they did a couple times here and there, and he did okay. Actually, he did a lot better. All the narrative that came out of Albert O for his absolute atrocious blocking, I thought he did okay.
Yeah, agreed.
I didn't think he did great. I certainly thought he did better than some of the other tight ends we've had.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I really question is, if Locke was struggling at the beginning of the year and you had Albert O sitting inactive on the bench, to me, that's a no-brainer. You say you bring in the guy that there's natural chemistry with. I mean, I'm not sure. If anyone remembers that first throw that they kind of threw a catch and pass. I'll speak eventually. And so if you actually look at that, I mean, the mic'd up moment that happened there, and that you heard Albert O after the game, where Drew ran up to and said, "Just like Mizzou, baby," and so there's clearly a natural kind of camaraderie there that's already naturally built up. And in a shortened off season with a new offense, to previous comment earlier in the show here, to me, that's a no-brainer. Why didn't he play earlier?
Yeah, and it looks like from now I'm stuttering. And it looks like we may have our 3-team tight end in Noah Fant, Albert O, and Troy Fumagalli. I think Fumagalli more than redeemed himself. And I know that there's a bit of a backward situation in terms of contract, because Fumagalli was let go by Denver and then he was brought back up. So, but
I was a huge fan of him.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys where I said, oh, and I kind of had one of those types of moments, because you literally expected him to just kind of be a quick fill-in, right? And I actually thought that he outplayed Fant. Jake Butt was hurt again.
Surprise.
for like what, the 12th time or 15th time? I don't know. I lost count.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because he seems like a really good guy, and everyone around him certainly seems to be rooting for him. But I knew a bunch of guys too that were really, really good at what they did, and they were amazing players. But the problem is that their bodies just were not cut out to play that kind of sport at that kind of level. And the higher up you go into the ranks from college into the pros, you're just dealing with a different different grade of people. So,
Right. Fant became decent at it. Alberto was hard trash at blocking, says Mr. Boggins in the chat.
I said decent. I didn't say all pro.
Well, there's room for improvement. But we can honestly say these three gentlemen are better than Jake Butt, as you said. They're better than Jeff Hireman, and they're better than Mundungus' favorite, Nick Vannett. And so it'll be interesting to see where Denver goes in maybe towards the end of the draft, if they can find a tight end, maybe undrafted, maybe in free agency. So it's good to go into the offseason not searching for a tight end. And it'll make their decision a lot easier in terms of Jake Butt and even Nick Vannett. I'm pretty sure those two guys have probably played their last down as Broncos.
Oh, I don't think so. I think Denver will probably keep Vannett around.
Probably.
Or well, it'll be Fant. I hope at least it'll be Fant, Albert O, Fumagalli, and Vannett. And then my hope there is they just say, we got our guys for this year, and or coming up to next season, and then you don't have to worry about anyone else.
Yeah. Now the running back situation, Rich, is going to be really interesting going forward, because me personally, and we kind of, now that I think about it, we kind of got off target in terms of the grading, but that's okay. I was really expecting a 1-2 punch from Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay. But the biggest headline going into the season was just how ridiculous Melvin Gordon's contract was in terms of paying a running back, and how people were pissed off at the way Elway went about it. And I spent most of the offseason trying to get people to understand, like, stop crying over spilled milk. The ink is dry. It's done. There's nothing you can say that's going to, change it. Melvin Gordon's a Bronco. Let's see what he can do. Now, Melvin Gordon, obviously, he didn't live up to a $16 million running back contract. Let's get that out of the way. But he at least did good when the chips were down, when Philip Lindsay got hurt, when Philip Lindsay was struggling, when it just wasn't there. Melvin Gordon was able to pick up the slack. Now, he did have his fumbling issue. He had 4 fumbles on the year. I think he was tied, if I'm not mistaken, or probably maybe even second to Ezekiel Elliott's in fumbles. So he, Melvin Gordon hasn't been an exact saint. But I think that he's been at least worth some of his $8 million a year contract. Let's say half, $4 million at best. So, as much as I love Philip Lindsay, over the season, I kind of started feeling bad for him, because he just kept going out there and he wasn't at 100%. And instead of taking the necessary time to, fully heal, it's like he tried to heal as fast as he could, and then he went out there, but his cuts weren't the same. His running progress wasn't the same. And yeah, some of that you can blame on Pat Shurmur, because his running back schemes are pretty head scratching, to say the least. But when you don't have a healthy Philip Lindsay that can't cut or run outside the tackles like he can, and Melvin Gordon can't, it kind of makes me think that if Denver can get somebody like Najee Harris, who's been rumored to be one of the best running backs in the draft, if he
follow me on Twitter, that's my pick for the Broncos, by the way.
Yeah, and I'm actually starting to believe it. I feel that if Najee Harris falls to number 9 in the draft, and the Broncos pick him instead of a defensive player like a cornerback or a linebacker, that they will move on from Philip Lindsay.
Sorry, just reverting back. I saw Boggan's comment there. I totally forgot my guy. I'm cutting Vannett in favor of Beck on the tight ends. Sorry, Beck is my dude. Beck is my dude. Sorry, and fast forwarding to the running backs. Part of the issue was last year our offensive center McGovern, when he was there, was able to move the person in front of him physically. And Philip Lindsay had a lot of his runs, particularly the ones up the middle there, as a result of the gaps between the guard and the center, and then on the other side between the guard and the center. And Cushenberry was just I have a, like I said back in the very beginning of the show, I do have a serious concern with Cushenberry. You need that offensive center that can physically move the person in front of them to move that hole in the middle. And for someone like Lindsay, who doesn't even need much space, but where he really does not do well is when he goes forward and he gets kind of pushed back.
Yeah.
He does not do very well resetting himself.
Agreed. Now, the fact that Pat Shurmur did have a couple of flashes in terms of when he swung the tackles around, that actually helped out the running back game a lot.
No, he moved the guards.
Or the guards, I'm sorry.
He moved the guards. Yeah,
when he moved the guards, that actually showed that can be an improvement. Now, why Pat Shurmur only showed those in flashes and not consistency?
Sorry, just to cut in there real quick again. That is not a Shurmur run offense.
Well, that's true.
That movement of the guards,
I'll give you that.
there, that is 100% a Munchak.
Oh,
that's a Munchak scheme. Munchak, that's his deal. Is that guard shift to that's a Munchak run scheme. So something to keep in mind in there. That is not a Shurmur offense. The Shurmur's offense is that what we saw that wasn't working. That was Shurmur. When we started running the ball and started getting the guard movement to shift and kind of get them to the outside to seal the edge and then have the back go up. That's a Munchak style play.
Okay. Now let me ask you this then, Rich. Last season, Vic Fangio went on record as saying that the coaching staff would be safe. Nobody was in danger of getting cut. And then out of nowhere, Rich Scangarello lost his job and it was hello, Pat Shurmur. So let's say, hypothetically, that the same thing happens this year. Who would you say should be the offensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos?
I had to do a lot more research into those that are there. We saw some legitimate progress from Drew Lock. And as much as it pains me, I think we probably need to keep Shurmur on board to keep the consistency for Lock. I'd also argue that if we do go for a GM, which we're going to quickly get to in just a minute or two, if we do go to a GM that is inclined to bring in a seasoned veteran who might be able to make those reads and follow those progressions and not have to think 5 minutes before they make the throw, I think that Shurmur's offense can work, because I think you can release the ball a lot faster because you'll be able to read the defense and then know the 3 different progressions in the route tree. So I actually think that would certainly be something that would be beneficial to us if we brought in a vet. I think Shurmur stays though.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But that hypothetical question has been on my mind today. And Glenn Hauser says LaFleur from San Francisco would be good, but I think Shurmur is safe. And I do too, because Shurmur and Fangio are a lot closer than Scangarello and Fangio were. Let's just be honest with you, with everyone. But the fact that if that were to happen, that idea just came into my mind. And it's crazy for me to say this, but I don't actually think he would be a great fit, but I would be intrigued to see what Doug Peterson as an offensive coordinator can do with somebody like Drew Lock as an offensive coordinator, because obviously we saw that whatever he was trying to do with Carson Wentz wasn't working. But the fact that he was able to do that with Jalen Hurts it shows promise. So wherever Dougie P does land, if he has a young quarterback that kind of resembles what Jalen Hurts brings to the table, they'll have a pretty good show to put on.
I just think Doug Peterson's going to pull an Adam Gase, and except I actually think Doug Peterson was in an even better position than Adam Gase when he got the Jets job. I think that this is from what I heard and when I was reading today, this was Doug Peterson was basically being told what to do within the Eagles organization. he felt that he had earned the extra rope to potentially hang himself, for lack of better terms.
Mm-hmm.
And he was not being given that opportunity. And it basically got between him and the owner butting heads, and him saying, fine, then fire me. And the owner said, okay. Um, so I have a funny feeling that Doug Peterson did not put himself in that position without knowing that at least one or two other teams were likely quite interested in him.
Mm-hmm.
I have full expectation in the next day or two we're going to hear him going for an interview, and it's basically going to be interview, dinner, contract. Hi, welcome our new head coach.
Yeah. Going back to what Vic said that the Seahawks offensive coordinator is available now. So I haven't gotten any notification saying that the Seahawks have moved on from Brian Schottenheimer, but I would be interested to see
I agree.
What he can bring. Glenn Hauser says he hadn't thought about Peterson being the a possible offensive coordinating chance, and we're running kind of low on time, so we're going to try to speed this up as we can, folks. Rich did bring up the GM talk. Now, obviously, John Elway stepping down was a giant surprise for everybody in Broncos country. I don't think anybody expected it. That I was actually expecting something like that coming from John Elway next year when his contract was up. So him giving up GM.
No, I was waiting for
it. So him giving up GM the position to me anyway was a surprise. And there have been suitors, there have been candidates, people have been throwing names left and right, but it's come down to three people, if I'm not mistaken, which is Champ Kelly, George Patton,
Patton,
whatever, yeah, George Patton, thank you,
yeah,
and Fontenot. I did say that right?
Fontenot.
So I'm not super into what GMs are the greatest GMs or whatever. So I just go basically off of what my sources tell me and who they believe is good or not. But it sounds like the Broncos country can't go wrong with either one of those three. And I think Kelly would probably be for sure number 3. But if the Broncos can hold out for Fontenot, depending on what happens in this weekend's divisional round game, like me and you talked about backstage, Rich, if the Saints win and the Broncos don't want to wait until they can get a personal interview, then they're probably just going to go with George Patton.
After today, I'm not convinced that Patton isn't necessarily their number 1. I'm only saying that. Well, sorry, I think you're right. Although I think the Broncos are leaning more towards, from what I can tell, wanting a guy now, because I think they want him here. Thanks. I in all fairness, I did say I want to dig more into what OCs are available and whatnot. But I actually think that our first choice is probably Fontenot. And to me, as a Broncos fan and as all Broncos fans, that should make us happy, because my concern after what I've seen after this offseason and what I saw what was going on was, I know this sounds very conspiracy theory-esque, but I'm not fully convinced that the hiring and firing of Scangarello was a Vic Fangio decision. I'm leaning a little bit more towards personally the fact that I personally believe that I think that may have been more of an Elway decision, wanting that seasoned veteran leadership on the offensive side of the ball, knowing that Vic Fangio was basically almost exclusively focusing on the defensive side of the ball, which I think is pretty clear for most people to see. And so part of me then wondered if that was a point of contention between Elway and Fangio. And then now all of a sudden, as this year concludes, Shermer steps in, Scangarello's out, and now all of a sudden Elway has now been promoted and is no longer the GM. So there's too many pieces that kind of line up to being a little odd. And that happens to be one of them for me. So I'm actually wondering if that may be kind of the underlying piece. And if that's the case, then I actually think Ellis is probably trying to push for long-term Broncos success as opposed to a short-term stopgap. And in my opinion, Kelly was that short-term stopgap. So the fact that we're now seeing Patton and Fontenot, I'm a resident Canadian, so I pronounce it using the French accent properly. So because we're seeing both of those guys as front runners, to me, that makes me very excited as a Broncos fan, because I believe both of those guys are showing us as fans that gone are the days of not living up to what Mr. B's standards are.
Right.
And that makes me super excited.
Lamiron Man 9995 says, do you see Julock throwing for 4,000 plus yards, 30 plus touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, and completes at least 67% of his passes, and Jerry Jeudy having a 1,000 yard year, and Sutton? If so, do you think they will contend? I mean, honestly, that's kind of what people had in mind for this past year. And so at this point, that's almost wishful thinking, Rich. I would like to sit here and say, yeah, Drew Lock is going to have that type of season. But unfortunately, we saw that injuries if we can just keep down the injury bug away from Denver, let the injury bug go bite somebody else, leave us alone for a season or two, you know. But at this point, Rich, that's wishful thinking. I would love to see Drew Lock and Jerry Jeudy and Sutton put up 1,000 yards each, but it has to. They have to show some type of improvement. Pat Shurmur's game plan has to jump by leaps and bounds. Drew Lock has to clear up the interceptions and work on his ball security and stop throwing off of his back foot, which makes me panic every time I see it. So, but I would love to see it.
I just don't think that's realistic for Drew Lock throwing for those types of yardages unless he truly looks inwards at himself and, like I said earlier, focuses on one or two things this offseason and says and makes one of those things ball placement. So as an example, biggest thing to get yourself to yardage like that is when Jerry Jeudy's coming out of his breaks is you lead him slightly with the ball. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden you end up with a guy who is more than technically capable of catching that ball, but then he gets like another 10 yards after the catch. Well, you're credited for those extra yards as the quarterback. So all of a sudden a 5 or 6 yard completion turns into like a 10 yard or 11 yard completion. Well, that's a big deal. That adds up over the course of the year and over the course of the season. And you simply then go from maybe being like a 2,000-3,000 or 4,000 or 2,000-3,000 yard quarterback, and then you start getting into the 4,200, 4,400, 4,500 yard quarterback. But to kind of go back on that, I think Denver has come to a realization today, or not today, but after this last season, that we are not the Kansas City Chiefs. Mm-hmm. And I believe that through looking inward and looking at our player personnel and looking at where we play, that we are better off becoming back to that kind of a little bit of an old school Denver look where we are a run first football team and we can go from there. And I think if that's the team that we want to be, to basically slow the other team down because we're chewing up that clock and staying on the field and winning those one-on-one battles on the offensive line and pushing the ball down the field, I just don't think 4,000 yards is realistic.
Chuck Pagano retired, just received the message. So that's kind of a bit of a shock, seeing as how he had looked out to be the head coach of the Denver Broncos just 2 years ago. So hopefully it's not because of his health. I know he had some health issues while he was with the Indianapolis Colts. I have Bears fans who, I'll be blunt, were not happy with the way he was running that defense that Vic Fangio left behind. But that sucks to hear.
Yeah. Both I can confirm both the Hawks and Pagano are both those chat items 100% true. I just checked it on the interwebs.
Yeah. And Boggin said, Broncos country, do not pick up Schottenheimer. Take it from him, who's from Seattle and knows a little bit more about Schottenheimer than Broncos country probably does in terms of coach, not facing him.
And we're getting real low on time here. I just want to quickly speak. Thank you, Jerry, for joining us. I really appreciate it. I agree. I more than cringe, though. I almost closed my eyes. But with regards to him stepping up on target, it is still super frustrating for me that literally a ball placement, maybe no more than this much, or even an extra foot or two for Locke, can mean so much more success for him. And if I have any hopes for him in this offseason, assuming the GM opts to keep him, and even if they bring in a veteran, Locke literally is in control of his own destiny, even if we bring in a veteran. So if Locke can stay with this team and can prove that he's able to work on those things that he needs to work on, he will be our quarterback for the entirety of 2021, because it is up to Locke to prove and to fend off effectively the veteran quarterback that they bring in. And one of the ways he can do that is by learning ball placement. And honestly, so many of those interceptions, I mean, I bet you if I went back and reviewed the tape, which I might have actually eventually do in the offseason, I bet you 50% of those interceptions never happen.
Sorry. No, I totally agree with you 100%, Rich. And unfortunately, Broncos country, that's going to have to do it for our show today.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed the very first live stream episode of Broncos Talk. In case you guys haven't heard the news, Broncos Talk has affiliated or joined the MHRT podcast family. So we're proud to be a part of this family. We're proud for this new venture in terms of where it leads us down the road. But just make sure you guys tune in every Tuesday at, I can't even remember the times, but
6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm in the Eastern time zone. Go Ontario from Canada. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. Just make sure to stay up, follow ups, and also make sure you tune in on Thursdays for the Mile High Roundtable podcast with our good friends Mike, Glenn, Christy, and of course Mr. Boggins, who thanks for being on the show, watching this. But anyway, and if you're listening to us on the audio version on Anchor or Google or wherever it is, God, thank you very much for being a continued supporter and listener of the show. We hope to see you guys next week. So for me, myself, Adan Diaz, and for my co-host, Rich, thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.
Thank you, guys.
So long.